You know what's interesting? A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today are not things that I intentionally did earlier in my life. But after reading the Bible from beginning to end, I I realized that many of the financial principles that help me build wealth have actually been in the Bible for, thousands of years. What's even more interesting is that I had actually previously given credit to other books for teaching me these specific ideas when, truthfully and in reality, many of these authors were just simply just repackaging principles that were already in the Bible. So in this video, I wanted to share some of my favorite money lessons and why they might completely change how you think about money. And what surprised me the most was that out of Jesus's 30 plus or so parables, over half of them, involve money or stewardship. So the way I see it, I don't think this is a coincidence. Before we get into the non-financial lessons I have for today, there's something important that I want to, just get off my chest, and I just want to say. A lot of times when people talk about the Bible, the conversation gets stuck on small details because, people just start debating specific rules or behaviors, and in the process, I feel like we just miss the bigger picture. It's like that old saying, sometimes people miss the forest because they're, staring too closely at the trees. Look, I'm sure, you've often heard people say things like, if you don't do this, you're not going to be saved, or if someone lives this way, they're not going to go to heaven. But look, at the same time, there isn't always that same level of scrutiny when it comes to things that are clearly listed in the commandments. I'm talking about things like lying, stealing, bearing false witness, or coveting what others have. These things happen far more than anything else. Those things are directly addressed in the Ten Commandments, but they don't always receive the same attention. That's just backwards to me. And, that's always bothered me just a little bit. Because when you step back and look at the broader message of the Bible, the central commands are really simple. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. What's interesting is that if someone truly lives by those two principles, or commandments, the other commandments naturally fall into place. Because if you genuinely love your neighbor, you're not going to be lying or stealing or trying to exploit them or try to harm them in any kind of way. And if you truly love God, that shapes how you live, how you treat people, and how you approach the world around you. Now, obviously, none of us do this perfectly. Everyone falls short in different ways, including myself, obviously. But the point isn't to pick and choose certain rules so we can feel morally superior to other people. The point is to focus on the larger principles that guide how we live. And look, ultimately, the only one capable of, any kind of perfect justice is God. So the goal of this video isn't to exclude anyone or judge anyone. My goal here is very simple. I want to focus on what the Bible teaches about money and financial wisdom. Because what I found are some very simple principles about money, work, patience, generosity, and also contentment. And interestingly enough, many of these principles overlap almost perfectly with everything that we're seeing today in regards to personal finance. So let's get into the list, and stay tuned because number one is, obviously my favorite. Number 9, money reveals what you really value. This statement comes from Jesus, and in my opinion, it's one of the most honest observations ever made about money. If you really want to understand what someone values in their life, don't just listen to what they say, look at where their money's going. The whole saying, follow the money. Because money has a way of exposing our priorities. People can say they value family, community, or generosity, but the way they spend their money often tells us, the more honest story. Because look, when we spend money, we're making decisions about what truly matters to us in that specific moment. For some people, money flows toward status. For others, it might flow toward comfort or security. Now, none of these things are necessarily wrong on their own. But what Jesus is pointing out is that money often reveals what we trust the most. Look, for some people, money itself becomes the thing that they trust for security. For others, it becomes a thing that they chase for identity or recognition. But when you start paying attention to where your money constantly and consistently just goes to, you begin to see some sort of pattern. And that pattern usually reveals what you truly believe is going to bring you some sort of happiness, safety, or fulfillment. So the lesson here is about examining yourself and to intentionally direct your money towards the things that actually matter. Like your family, your future, your faith, and the people around you. Because look, if you don't intentionally decide where your money goes, it will, slowly start to shift towards things that don't necessarily matter in the long run. But when your spending habits align with your real values, money stops being something that controls you and it becomes a tool that helps you build the life that you actually want. Number 8, everything you have is temporary. Look, everything ultimately belongs to God. The world, the resources in it, and even the lives that we live are not things that we permanently own. Lack of better words, we're just managing it for a period of time. And unfortunately, this is something that people just refuse to believe, and truthfully, this might be because of ego. When people believe that they absolutely own everything that they have, they tend to hold on to money a lot more tightly. And wealth becomes something that they feel they need to protect and just accumulate endlessly. But when you see money as something that you're just managing rather than something that you actually, possess, it shifts your mindset because it's going to start to encourage responsibility instead of greed. Like, look, the reality is that no one keeps their wealth forever. We all know this, right? And, every person, eventually just leaves it behind. So the real question isn't how much money, you accumulate. The real question is how well you manage what you've been given while you still have the opportunity. Number 7, define what enough looks like. This, in my opinion, highlights one of the most dangerous traps in personal finance, which is the moving goalpost. If someone loves money itself, they will never feel like they have enough, like no matter how much they actually earn, because the desire for more simply just grows along with it. And I really want you to hear me on this. If you don't define what enough looks like before you actually reach it, you're going to constantly move the target. You're going to need a bigger house, a nicer car, and your investments are going to need to grow a lot faster. And suddenly the thing that you once thought would bring you peace becomes the thing that keeps you just, running for forever. We see this all the time. People make more money than they ever imagined was possible, but they still feel behind. So at that point, the issue is no longer financial, because this is truly just an identity problem rather than a money problem. And one of the wisest financial decisions that you can make is just defining what financial independence actually means for you. I'm talking what levels of income, what levels of savings, and what kind of freedom would genuinely allow you to live a really good life. Because if you don't define what enough looks like for you, you're going to spend your entire life just running a race with no finish line. Number 6, contentment is not the enemy of ambition. Many people misunderstand contentment. They assume contentment means settling for less or just abandoning, your ambition. But contentment doesn't eliminate ambition. It just protects it from just becoming distracted. Here's what I mean. From the outside, desperate people and ambitious people can look almost identical. Both may work hard. They are obviously going to end up pursuing opportunities and push themselves toward their goals. But the difference lies in what's driving them and their big why. Desperation often leads people to rush decisions, chase quick wins, and accept deals that they normally would just, say, I'm going to reject this. Contentment, on the other hand, is going to create stability. It allows someone to pursue success patiently, say no to bad opportunities, and build something meaningful over time instead of just, reacting out of fear or some sort of insecurity. So in a lot of ways, contentment acts as this stabilizing force in financial decision making. Number 5, debt reduces freedom. Look, the way I see it is this. When someone borrows money, a portion of their future already belongs to somebody else. Think about that for a second. This means every paycheck that they earn carries an obligation attached to it. This could be to a bank, a car dealership, a credit card company, a family member, or even a friend. Now, I'm sure some will try to categorize debt into good versus bad debt. But the broader principle is still the same, which is that debt limits your freedom. Here's what I mean. The more obligations someone carries, the fewer choices that they actually have. In the real world, this could show up as someone who's not able to change careers easily, hesitate to take risks, and feel pressure to maintain a certain income simply to keep up with their financial commitments. Over time, these constraints can shape someone's entire life. That's why the people who tend to have the most financial flexibility are often the ones with the fewest financial obligations. So, in other words, they have no debt or very little and are working towards eliminating it. These types of people have the freedom to adapt, to take opportunities, and also just weather difficult seasons without constant pressure. So, debt freedom, in many ways, is one of the most valuable financial assets that a person can actually have. Number 4, slow wealth is strong wealth. Look, people are constantly presented with opportunities that promise, very fast returns, quick profits, and, overnight success. But the reality is that wealth that's built, very quickly is often very unstable. And, we've all seen this with people who won the lottery, right? The thing is, when money arrives without habits, discipline, and the wisdom required to manage it, it tends to disappear just as quickly as it came. This is why slow, steady progress is usually the way to go, no matter how boring it actually sounds. Now, most people understand this concept intellectually. They know about compound interest and long-term investing, but very few people actually believe it emotionally early enough to remain patient. And that's why just patience itself becomes a powerful advantage, because the people who stay disciplined long enough are often the ones who get to experience just the greatest growth. Number 3, save during the good times. This is one of my favorite stories and one of the clearest examples of financial foresight in the Bible. So basically, Joseph interpreted a dream to Pharaoh that predicted 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. So instead of just simply enjoying, the prosperity while it lasted, he advised Pharaoh to start preparing. During the years of plenty, they stored resources in preparation for the years of scarcity. And this strategy alone ultimately saved an entire nation from disaster. Now, this principle 100% applies just as clearly to personal finance today. Here's what I mean. Markets fluctuate and unexpected events happen. That's why good financial planning often and always involves preparing for the good times by building an emergency fund and investing for the future to create a buffer against any kind of uncertainty that might, come in your life. So essentially, when someone builds reserves during the times of abundance, they ultimately gain stability during the times of difficulty. Number 2, helping the poor. Look, I really love this because this is suggesting that when someone helps a person in need, God treats that act as if we are doing it directly for him. And that generosity is not going to go unnoticed and will ultimately be rewarded. And this theme of generosity applies throughout the entire Bible. Like in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says, "Give and it will be given to you." And also in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus also teaches that whatever is done for the least among us is considered as done for him. This teaching reminds me that we should intentionally be looking for ways to help the less fortunate in any way that we can, and that money is not meant to just exist for personal consumption. Part of its purpose is to serve others. And personally, the best feeling that you get with money is when you actually give it to those that actually need it. And what's interesting is that there has been many studies that have shown that generous people often end up doing a lot better financially over time than those who are not as generous. Part of the reason may be that because, generous people tend to think in terms of solving problems and helping others. And people who tend to solve problems tend to create value in society. But look, regardless of the reason, generosity often produces a kind of wealth that goes far beyond money. Here's what I mean. It creates a stronger community, deeper relationships, and a greater sense of purpose. And in the end, one of the most meaningful ways to use wealth is to make sure that the people around us are not left behind. Number one, money can't give your life meaning. Now, I chose one verse from this book, but really it's the entire book itself. This was written by Solomon, who is considered the richest and wisest king in history. Solomon had everything people chase today. I'm talking about wealth, success, pleasure, achievements, and also influence. And by the end of his life, he came to a surprising conclusion, which was that everything is just meaningless. Now, look, at first that sounds, kind of depressing, right? But it's actually, really insightful. So essentially, Solomon realized that he had been trying to extract the ultimate meaning from temporary things like money, pleasure, accomplishments, and none of those items delivered the fulfillment that he expected. Now, I hope you understand that this is someone who climbed every ladder people spend their entire lives climbing. And he came back and said that all of those things are basically just meaningless. So the financial lesson in this is, simple, at least to me. You can pursue wealth and build success. That's perfectly fine. But those things should never be the source of your meaning. The book ultimately says that life is about enjoying the simple things: good food, good drink, and meaningful work. And logically speaking, that's really what most of us really want anyways. But what's even more important than that is to fear God and keep his commands, because this is the entire duty of humanity. Now, before I lose most of you here, I want to ask a logical question for those that are turned off by that last statement. What do you actually lose by living that way? And what do you actually gain? When you look at the commands that God gives: don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't betray people, don't murder, honor others, your father and mother, love your neighbor. Those aren't restrictions that are meant to hold you back. They're actually guardrails meant to keep your life from falling apart. In fact, Jesus summarized the entire moral law with just two commands: love God and love your neighbor. So if people actually lived that way, it would produce the kind of society that everybody says that they want. So Solomon's conclusion isn't meant to discourage us from pursuing any kind of, earthly success. It's instead meant to remind us not to expect money or achievements to do something they were technically never designed to do. Because when money becomes your meaning, you're never going to have enough. When meaning comes first, money becomes what it should have been all along, which is just a tool. So let's land this plane. What's interesting about the Bible's teachings on money is that it rarely focuses on techniques or shortcuts. Instead, it focuses on character, priorities, and wisdom. So money itself isn't the main point here. The main point is how we think about it and how we use it. Because the deeper message behind all of these lessons is this: money is just a tool. It was never meant to carry the weight of your identity, your purpose, and even just your meaning in life. That's why the Bible repeatedly warns against loving money, chasing money endlessly, or trusting money for security. Because money ultimately makes a terrible master, but it could be an incredible servant. When money is managed responsibly and shared generously, it creates stability for your family, opportunities for your future, and real help for those people around you. And interestingly, when people follow these principles, financial success just becomes a byproduct. And this is not because money was the ultimate goal, but because wisdom tends to produce good outcomes over time. Thanks for watching.